10-year anniversary of the 2011 Muppet film recently passing, I thought it was the perfect time to revisit it. Because the 2011 movie was a big deal for the Disney company and for the Muppets franchise, and I think that's something that deserves to be talked about. So let's play the music, light the lights, and dive deep into the history and importance of the Muppets 2011. In 1989, Jim Henson no longer wanted the responsibility of running an entire company and started looking for places to sell his properties. Keep in mind that he had been working as the head of the Jim Henson Company, which was founded in 1958, for over 30 years. The hope was that by selling the company, Jim would be able to put more of his effort into the creative process of his work, and selling his properties to a bigger company would bring in more publicity to his various projects, as well as recognition to his studio as a whole. When it came time to sell the studio, Disney seemed like the obvious choice. Disney was slowly pulling itself out of what is now known as the Dark Age of Disney, a period of time where most movies flopped, and the company was searching for anything that could revive it. Jim Henson had admired the studio's work for quite some time, and he had a vast collection of content ready for purchase. It seemed like the perfect fit. He started negotiations with then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. There are rumors of over $150 million being put on the table. However, Jim Henson made it very clear that while he was looking to sell the vast majority of his collection, he would not be selling the rights to Sesame Street or any of the characters that would come with it. That would be one of the biggest conflicts when it came to negotiations with Michael Eisner, with Eisner attempting multiple times to get Jim to change his mind. Still, things were looking bright for the Muppets when it came to Disney. A ride for the Disney parks titled Muppet Vision 3D went into production, and plans for a year-long Muppet Disney Parks takeover started being planned. The project was titled Muppetland. I'll leave a really great video in the description if you want to learn more about it. With multiple projects in development and tons of money being put towards implementing the characters into the parks, the chances of the Muppets being purchased by Disney looked incredibly high. That is, of course, until May 16th, 1990, when Jim Henson suddenly passed away due to a fatal case of pneumonia. His death came as a complete surprise. Muppet Vision 3D was actually the last project he ever worked on, with his death coming before the project was finished and him never getting to see the final project. Disney and the Jim Henson Company continued negotiations for a little bit, but it soon became clear that they weren't going to be able to come to an agreement, and the negotiations were quickly dropped, with most of the Muppet Disney plans being completely scrapped. And then the Muppets were sold to another company, and then another, and then another. The following years would be full of lots of complicated business deals that we're not gonna cover in this video. All you need to know is in 2003, the Jim Henson family bought back the company for $84 million, and then sold the Muppet properties along with the Disney Channel show Bear in the Big Blue House to Disney in 2004, 15 years after the original proposal. Soon after, the Muppets Wizard of Oz, the first big Muppet project since Disney's acquisition, was released in 2005. The TV special made a decent amount of money, but was torn apart by both Muppet fans and Wizard of Oz fans. It currently stands at a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, as far as I am aware, is the lowest rating of any Muppet movie ever, which is not a great place to start with a new property that you just spent millions of dollars buying. After that, the Muppet franchise went fairly quiet. Occasionally, a TV or straight-to-DVD special would be released, but it was nothing compared to the quantity of content being produced in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So when it came to produce the next big Muppet project, and arguably the first big project since Muppets from Space in 1999, a question had to be asked. How do we introduce these characters to a new generation? After all, it had been arguably over a decade since the Muppets were at their peak. The 2011 film was so much more than just a movie. It was Disney's attempt to revive what was essentially a dead franchise. A franchise that a huge portion of audiences, mostly children, weren't familiar with at all. Disney needed to make a film that would excite new audiences, but also please people who grew up with these characters and remembered what they used to be. And in 2011, they did exactly that. This video is part history lesson and part analysis, but I know inevitably parts of it are going to be impacted by my own personal opinions. I feel the need to explain my history with the 2011 Muppet film in order for you to better understand the lens that I'm operating under. One of the biggest goals of the 2011 Muppet movie was to introduce a new generation to these characters and get them excited about what the franchise could do. And I am a perfect example of that goal coming to fruition. I was 9 years old when this movie came out, and I very distinctly remember seeing it in the theater. I didn't grow up with the Muppet Show, and I certainly didn't have any interests in puppetry as an art form or what went into making the things that I saw on screen. But then I saw the 2011 Muppet movie and everything changed. This is the movie that sparked my love for Jim Henson's creations and puppetry in general, a love that obviously never went away. I'm telling you this because there's a certain level of nostalgia that I have for the 2011 Muppet movie. And the same way that people tend to be more forgiving of the original film because it's what they grew up with, I'm sure to some extent that's what I'm going to do here, even though I'm actively trying not to. Because this is the movie I grew up with. This movie for me did exactly what it set out to do. It got a 9-year-old really excited about puppets, and now 19-year-old me probably cares too much about them. With all of that being said, let's continue our deep dive. The Muppets is the franchise's 7th feature film, written by long-term Muppet fans Jason Segel and Nicholas Stoller. They had collaborated with the Jim Henson Creature Shop for their comedy show Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and it was through that they were inspired to write the next big Muppet movie. They pitched their idea to Disney in 2008, which resulted in them getting a deal to help further develop their script. The film was originally titled The Greatest Muppet Movie of All Time, and Segel in particular was very outspoken about how excited he was for the project. In a 2008 interview, he said, quote, "I just turned in my first draft of the Muppets and I'm really excited about it. I think we're bringing them back. Hopefully it'll fall right into the pantheon of the Great Muppet Caper, Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppet Movie. You know, we're trying to make one of those," end quote. People were excited. Comparing this movie to arguably some of the greatest Muppet movies in the franchise was a big deal, and it was very clear that this movie would be getting a lot more time, attention, and money than any Muppet project had in quite some time. The film would be directed by James Bobbin, who was known for helping create The Flight of the Conchords. The first table reading was held in May of 2010, and in July of 2010, they met with the heads of Pixar to help further develop the script and officially announced a 2011 Thanksgiving release. The film follows Walter, his brother Gary, and Gary's fiancée Mary as they take a trip to Los Angeles for Mary and Gary's 10-year anniversary. Walter is a huge Muppets fan and has been his entire life, so naturally they go to visit the Muppet Studios, where they find out that the film's main villain, Tex Richmond, has bought the studio and will be tearing it down to drill for oil. With help from Kermit the Frog, the Muppet team is reassembled to put on one last show, a telethon, in order to raise enough money to buy the studio back. It's a very simple plot, and I honestly don't mind it. A lot of Muppet films have had fairly simple plots, because in all honesty, it's the characters and how they interact with each other that helps make this franchise thrive anyway. Out of all of the Muppet films, it's probably closest plot-wise to the original Muppet movie, since the plot of both of them is rounding up the Muppets group and putting on a show. I think it was really smart having the Muppets reunite in this movie. The audience is slowly introduced to each character in a way that makes it easy for newer watchers to know who everyone is.
Rolf?
Huh?
Want to get back together?
Okay.
Good.
And it makes sense from a storytelling standpoint to have the standstills within the franchise exist within the Muppets universe. It gives them an opportunity to talk about the Muppets' absence from mainstream media and deal with the consequences that that might have on an actual group of artists who split up, especially when some of the splits weren't necessarily on good terms. It makes the stakes higher, and as a lot of people are introduced to these characters for the first time, the characters themselves are reintroduced to each other and who they've become while apart. I think it was really smart. I think it does a really good job of convincing us that these characters exist in our reality. Because so did their absence. It feels a lot like I'm watching behind the scenes celebrity drama. And having Walter, the ultimate fanboy, tag along really helps with that. The tone is fun and lighthearted with elements of comedy just like Muppet movies before. I will say the 2011 Muppet movie has been criticized for being more grounded than older movies, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I mean, sure it is compared to something like The Treasure Treasure Island movie, but it has a very similar tone to the 1979 film. The Muppets can do grounded. They've done grounded before. I mean, one of my favorite Muppet movies is A Muppet Christmas Carol. I think the same thing applies here. When Kermit and Piggy talk about their breakup, when we see Fozzie in the alleyway, the entirety of pictures in my head. The film is surprisingly emotionally mature, while still managing to be a lighthearted comedy, and I really respect them for being able to find that balance. I also like that the end of the movie is the actual telegram, so we get to see them performing together in a theatrical setting. Something that we watched for years in the actual Muppet Show. From a cinematography standpoint, nothing bothers me too much. This was definitely the start of the use of CGI within the Muppets franchise, and we all know how that turned out. The CGI isn't necessarily bad, it's just noticeable, and it's something that I pay attention to because I've always loved the practicality of the Muppets. That being said, the visuals are still nice to look at, the choreography is fun and engaging, the puppetry is obviously super cool looking, and they used lots of techniques that were developed in earlier Muppet films. The three main human characters would be Gary, played by co-writer Jason Segel, Mary, played by the hilarious Amy Adams, and the film's main villain, Tex Richmond, played by Chris Cooper. There's also a slew of celebrity cameos, just like every Muppet movie that came before, including but not limited to Jack Black, Emily Blunt, Whoopi Goldberg, Selena Gomez, Neil Patrick Harris, Jim Parsons, Christian Shaw, and Rico Rodriguez. Not to mention that many Muppet performers would be returning, including Steve Whitmire, Dave Goelz, Bill Beretta, Tyler Bunch, and Matt Vogel. For people unfamiliar with how the Muppets operate, this might seem surprising, but the Muppet characters have been played by an incredibly limited cast. Most of the time, characters are played by the same puppeteer from the time of their creation to whenever that puppeteer no longer works with the Muppets. Kermit the Frog has only ever been played by 3 puppeteers in the over 60 years of his existence, and Gonzo is still played by the same guy who played him when he was first introduced in 1976. Getting cast as a reoccurring Muppet character doesn't just mean that you'll be playing that character for that respective project. It most likely means you'll be playing that character every time it is utilized in all forms of Muppet media. Frank Oz, the original puppeteer behind characters like Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Animal, and Sam the Eagle, was asked to return to his roles for the film, an offer which he declined. Oz had been distancing himself from the Muppets company since the mid-1990s, giving multiple reasons for his departure. He wanted to spend more time with his family, and he also wanted to focus more on some of his own creative projects. Oz didn't want his entire career to be defined by the Muppets. It's also no secret that he's not exactly thrilled with the direction that the Disney company has been taking the characters. He's always been incredibly respectful about his opinions, but he's also very truthful. You can tell that what he says comes from a genuine place of love, not only for the characters, but for the legacy of Jim Henson and what he created.
They're very sweet now. Their job is to be rebellious. Their job is to say, screw Disney.
That being said, while Frank Oz didn't appear in the 2011 Muppet film, he did handpick his replacement, with most of his roles going to Eric Jacobson. Jacobson had been his official replacement since he left the company in the early 2000s. Another puppeteer who really got to shine in the 2011 Muppet film was puppeteer Peter Linz. Peter Linz had been working on Sesame Street since the early 1990s, but arguably he's more well known for his work on the Disney Channel show Bear in the Big Blue House, where he played the anxious blue mouse Tutter and Pip, one half of the Pip and Pop dynamic duo. I actually have an entire video structured very similar to this one, talking about the history and the behind the scenes of Bear in the Big Blue House. If you want to check it out, I'll link it in the description. In the 2011 film, Linz would be put in charge of portraying a new member of the Muppets cast, the lovable fanboy Walter. Walter is the human, puppet, man, or Muppet embodiment of the Muppets fan base. It's through Walter that we are shown just how much these characters meant to people and how big of a cultural phenomenon they were in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Something that was important to the story but needed to be explained to younger viewers who weren't there to witness it firsthand. I think it was clever to have an outside character fanboy freak out about the greatness of the Muppets so that the Muppets themselves didn't have to brag about how cool they were the whole time. After all, they had been famous famous for a really long time, so it makes sense that the excitement of that would have dulled over time, especially with the more grounded tone that the film is going for. Some people hate Walter. I don't. I love Walter. And as a hardcore Muppet fan, I really relate to him. I don't think it would be hard to interpret his character as an example of the importance of representation in media, but that is a completely different video for another time. That being said, I do understand why some people think he could come across as annoying. His childlike naivete would have gotten old fast. And there's a very fine line when it comes to characters idolizing other characters that we as an audience are supposed to relate to. There needs to be a good balance between Walter looking up to the Muppets, but the Muppets themselves still being presented as somewhat relatable characters. In other words, the Muppets aren't perfect, and having a very large portion of the story being told through the eyes of someone who idolizes them risks making them not flawed enough. And to some extent, the Muppets have definitely changed since being bought by Disney. Like Frank Oz said before, they're a lot nicer, they're a lot cuter.
They're not the Muppets that Jim had intended. They're very sweet.
They're cute.
They're cute. These are they're too sweet. They're not, and the relationships, there's no conflict as much as in the relationships as there should be.
But I don't necessarily think that's a Walter problem. I think that is a tonal problem that the Disney company has yet to figure out how to fix. Walter could have been really annoying, but I think the writers really took the time to give him some incredibly grounded scenes. And that, mixed with Linz's performance and Walter's overall puppet design, gives us a really likable, relatable, and earnest character that works really well with the story that this movie is trying to tell. The music in this movie absolutely slaps, and I cannot talk about the 2011 Muppet film without acknowledging that. You cannot have a good Muppet movie without music, and I cannot overstate the importance of music when it comes to the success of the Muppets in general, but also to the overall style of the franchise as a whole. And to be completely honest, this movie has one of my favorite soundtracks of any Muppet movie ever. The songs have a nice balance of light, peppy musical numbers like the opening Life's a Happy Song that really leans into the cheesiness of the musical genre, complete with tap breaks, overly optimistic lyrics, and fourth wall breaks.
Right in front of me.
Numbers like this are completely self-aware and poke fun at themselves, but at the same time aren't afraid to just have a silly little dance number. This is the Muppets after all. You're going to have to accept that some of it is going to be cheesy. Just start suspending your disbelief right off the bat there. At the same time, we are also treated to some deeply emotional songs, one of which is only 20 minutes into the film's runtime. Pictures in My Head is a ballad sung by Kermit the Frog as he reminisces on his past in the Muppet Show and attempts to process how much things have changed. As he sings, old portraits of the Muppets come to life and sing with him. He's completely surrounded by his past, which serves to make the stark contrast of his present even more emotional. And don't even get me started on the clip with Miss Piggy. I think this is one of the best songs in the movie. It's truly a turning point tonally. It's when the film starts taking itself a lot more seriously and actually starts to deal with the emotional consequences of what would happen if a group like the Muppets split. Some other songs include Me Party, a fun montage cover of a pre-existing pop song, We Built This City, and a full cast cover of Rainbow Connection, which I know was definitely partially put in there purely for fan service, but I don't care because I still get emotional every single time I listen to it. And of course, I cannot make a video about the 2011 Muppet film without talking about the musical masterpiece that is Man or Muppet. The song has honestly become a meme at this point, but we're gonna talk about it seriously because isn't that all I ever do on this channel anyway? Man or Muppet is a power ballad written by Bret McKenzie, who was famous for his work on Flight of the Conchords. McKenzie was music supervisor for the film, composing 5 original songs. He said in an interview that his daughter thought he was personal friends with Kermit the Frog, and every day before he left for work, she would come up to him and go, "Off to work, Daddy? Muppets?" In 2012, the song would win the Academy Award for Best Original Song, the first Oscar win for any Muppets production.
Bret McKenzie for Man or Muppets, the Muppets.
And it went on to become the most popular song from the movie by far. Man or Muppet serves as a turning point for the character arcs of Walter and Gary. It's when we finally see them addressing the internal conflicts that they've been dealing with throughout the course of the film. Gary's conflict comes from his relationship with his brother, who he's always felt the need to protect and include. This has put a strain focusing on his other relationships because he tends to put Walter's needs before the needs of others. Gary has to grapple with the fact that Walter is growing up and doesn't need him in the same ways that he used to. But as the song concludes, that gives him an opportunity to become his own person and give more attention to the other people in his life, primarily his girlfriend Mary. Walter, on the other hand, is someone who grew up as an outcast, finding comfort in the Muppets. He's finally being given a chance to become part of something that means so much to him. But it's a big leap of faith, and he has to address a lot of his self-doubt first. Becoming a Muppet is something Walter has to believe he deserves. But it's also partly him ending his attempt to conform with the other people around him. He has to accept himself for who he is before he's able to share who that person is with the world. Their character arcs complement each other through the way that they contrast, and I genuinely believe that this song does a really good job of communicating that. Plus, it's just the right level of cheesy and over the top. I can't help but smile every single time that I listen to it. I have been talking a lot about how much I like this movie, but I will be the first to admit that there are some things in it that don't necessarily work, one of which being how the film ends. I think the ending is incredibly rushed. The main conflict of the movie is resolved in a credits clip, which is mostly shown to us through newspaper clippings. Gonzo hits Tex Richmond in the head with a bowling ball, and from his hospital bed, supposedly because of his head injury, he just gives the Muppet studio and name back to the Muppets. Sure, the emotional conflicts have fairly decent payoffs, but the ending as a whole just isn't satisfying. While I was doing research for this video, I actually stumbled across a alternate ending that the film ended up cutting. And to be completely honest, I like this ending a lot more than what they decided to go with. The alternate ending starts when the letterboard stops, showing that the Muppets are a single dollar short from reaching their goal. In the film, Fozzie bumps into it, showing that they are actually millions of dollars away from reaching the goal, and all hope of buying back the studio is lost until Mr. Richmond receives a bowling ball to the face. In the original ending, the Muppets were actually only $1 away from reaching their goal. A hush falls over the theater. It seems like all hope is lost. And then Statler and Waldorf from their balcony drop down a single dollar. Here we are, day 2 of filming. But yes, originally, in the movie, Statler and Waldorf were supposed to throw down a single dollar, and they were gonna be the reason that the Muppets reached their financial goal to buy back the studio. I believe the exact quote was, "That wasn't so bad after all." And then they throw down their dollar, and the Muppets are victorious! I still consider Statler and Waldorf part of the Muppets crew, even though they would probably hate to hear me say that. But having the goal reached because someone within the Muppets group believed that they deserved it is a lot more of a satisfying ending than what we got. It was their love as a group that would have saved them, and not the fact that they have a bunch of adoring fans. And there's no reason that the end scene where they go out onto the streets and are greeted with thousands of people who never forgot about them needed to be cut. That still could have been included in the film, so we still would have gotten that payoff. And I also just think this would have done a good job of redeeming Statler and Waldorf, because for the mass majority of the film, they actively worked with Tex Richmond to shut down the studio, knowing full well that he planned to completely tear it down. So this would have been a nice redeeming moment for them. I'm also a firm believer that after over 60 years of heckling, it makes sense that they would have gotten a soft spot for the Muppets, even if they would absolutely never throw them a bone ever again. I think it would have been really sweet, and there's something to say about the emotional payoff of having characters who have actively hated the Muppets for 60 years be the ones that finally save them in the end. It's a good, strong ending, and I like it better than a coincidental bowling ball to the face, head injury induced solution. A little bit of a cop-out, I'm not gonna lie. Another problem I had with the 2011 film was how two-dimensional Tex Richmond was. Ooh, a big scary rich guy wants to drill for oil. That's so original, I've never seen that before. Granted, it's not that big of a deal because the film definitely makes up for it by focusing a lot on the other characters, but I still would have liked to see some sort of motivation. Funnily enough, Tex was actually supposed to have a much deeper character backstory and almost what could arguably be considered a character redemption arc, but they cut it. We were going to be treated to a flashback to Tex's childhood where the Muppets performed at his birthday party, but for some reason, he can't laugh. He's unable to feel the joy that the Muppets are known for bringing people, and he hates them for it. He was basically supposed to be the opposite of Walter, because Walter found joy and community within the Muppets, which is something that Tex never could. Gonzo still would have hit Richmond in the face with the bowling ball, but instead of that changing his mind to suddenly only give them the studio back, it would have given him back his ability to laugh and to experience joy. Pieces of that plotline are still hinted at throughout the final film, like when he says he's been a fan of the Muppets since he was a little kid, or when he still gets hit by the bowling ball. This is actually the origin of the maniacal laugh running gag. It was supposed to be a joke because Tex Richmond was incapable of laughing. Like I said before, I'm not really that bothered by the film having a generic villain because we spend so much time with the main cast anyways, but I'm almost more upset now about how generic he is because I know what we could have had and it would have been so much better, and having that paired with the original ending they had, that's just so much more of a satisfying ending. I don't know. I'm upset about it, but I don't care that much, but also I really care. It's fine. The Muppets came out on November 23rd, or Thanksgiving of 2011, and made $165 million in the box office. This was more money than the Muppets had ever made since being bought by Disney, and not only was the movie doing financially well, but people loved it. It currently stands at a 95 on Rotten Tomatoes, the highest rating of any Muppet movie. A sequel immediately went into production and was released on March 21st, 2014. Muppets Most Wanted received mostly positive reviews, but it only made $84 million, about half as much as the original film, and Disney considered it a financial flop. After that, a sitcom-style show was released in 2015 on ABC to mixed reviews, and long-term puppeteer Steve Whitmire, the performer behind Kermit the Frog, was fired in 2017. All too quickly, the Muppets returned to the same place the 2011 film worked so hard to drag them out of. Funding went down, marketing stopped almost entirely, and the overall quality of new content is lacking, to say the least. We're officially in another Muppet standstill, with the success of the 2011 film being more of an outlier than an indication of better stories to come. When I say I don't like how Disney treats the Muppets, the 2011 film has always been an exception, but still, almost 20 years after buying the franchise, Disney still has no idea how to treat the Muppets, their stories, or their characters. I loved the 2011 film. I just wish the characters that I loved so much weren't cast away after one movie didn't perform as well as they hoped it would. Anyway, that is my deep dive of the 2011 Muppet movie. Also, in some more exciting news, I recently published an article on the Puppet Nerd blog in partnership with Adam Krudinger. It is a little bit of a queer analysis based on my Gonzarella video. I will leave a link to that down in the description box down below if you want to check that out. It's very exciting. I've never had an article published before. Whoa! Thank you so much for watching! Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye!